Okay. 3, 2, 1. Hello everybody, welcome back to this virtual environment based off of Van Gogh's Starry Night. Today I wanted to show you some progress I've been making in terms of a VR application. It uses Firefox Reality and Hub's spokes in order to make it run, but I think you're familiar with that by now, given that this is probably the 7th video that I've been doing in this series. Today I wanted to show you a internet library. It's fairly exciting. It took me several hours to get working just based off of the model type, but I'll get more in depth with it whenever I enter the scene. So it uses the WebXR framework, and once you enter the scene, you're in a very large library, complete with a general art easel, which gives a little bit more definition and details. It's an internet library. It's a very large digital space. I'm going to hyperlink specific objects, and there's going to be some really interesting setups with it. So as you can see, it's a VR-based space, fairly large in terms of size. It has several stories and stairwells that I had to make out of scratch, and a ton of other specific things. I'm not sure if I got the scaling as accurate as I'd like it to be. It seems a little bit small, comparatively based when you're next to a chair, so to speak. Yeah, you look a little bit small comparatively, so like this one's toppled over, but yeah, you seem a little bit more like a toddler in this area, so I probably have to mess with the scaling just a little bit. But the intricate details are rather fascinating, especially in terms of the scaling. So let's go explore some specific elements, particularly the things that I've made. So this model was created for a free-to-play mobile game. I found it going through a specific series of forums that allowed me to search for random model types. And I found this library, which I found was particularly interesting. And for a mobile-based model, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I figure that it falls under fair use mainly because it follows a specific series of principles. One, it's a free-to-play mobile game. So the models and the files within them are basically free to begin with. Two, I had to heavily edit the model in terms of scaling, adjustments, getting some specific things to load properly, some things loaded improperly. It was a large process just to get that to happen. Another is that it's not for commercial use. This is mainly just a development area, which I think allows me to utilize this without really messing with it. That said, I still did leave that specific dedication simply to note that the developers made this and not me. Now, over time, it'll become my own, just in terms of how much tweaking and adjustment that I do in terms of making things, such as fixing stairwells, adjusting broken textures. As you can see, I couldn't get the textures to load properly in terms of some of the stairwells, but I'll explain that in further detail as we explore the space. I'm adding specific models to the room. Particularly, I'm linking specific segments, which I'll show in a later video, simply because this is far too large in order to describe. But let's walk around the space and give you a general tour of the specific environment and what's actually within this gigantic building, so to speak. If I adjust the scaling, I'll probably have to redo just about every little element in order to make it work. But the floor map is working just fine, at least in terms of stairs. So that's nice. It works for a decent locomotion, but you can also teleport as well, and that gives you a pretty good size estimate in terms of the scale. As you can see, there wasn't a stairwell that led up to the first floor. It was expecting probably to use specific levels of doors, and some elements are roped off, and based off of the geometry mapping, it will block you from entering that area, but you can teleport past specific blocks, which makes it easier. I think this was meant to be the main entry facility. But I had to add a specific number of models in order to make it so that it's not breaking the frame. Simply because this is a very not low-res model, but the model was made for a mobile hardware, which this is technically mobile hardware, so I guess that does make it interesting. But the game that this was modeled for came out in the mid-2010s, so that gives a rough estimation. As you can see, some textures are broken and only load from specific angles, which is rather fascinating, but that'll give me some more work to work on in the future. As you can see, I had to make this impromptu stairwell in order to make some semblance of things working. But as long as you can teleport onto it and teleport off of it, it loads just fine. As you can see, I can clip through the floor a little bit, and that makes it so that it's not 100% perfect in terms of the floor mapping, but it's easily remedied whenever you teleport around. Sometimes you'll teleport into the ground, but it's a simple teleport out of the mechanic in order to make that work. There's a lot of little touches in terms of these small modeled ladders in terms of the geometry, which I find rather interesting, especially since it's just in 3D space, and that's really fun. It gives a lot more of a lived-in vibe to the area. And I created these little platforms that allow me access to the other levels of the area, which greatly expands how big this library can be. And I rather like that. That makes it so that there's a lot that can be done with it. As you can see, you noticed how some specific models aren't loading, but from the opposite end, they load just fine. So let's see if I can jump out of the area. As you can see, they load from the exterior, but not from the interior, which is rather interesting, simply because it just makes it so that some things aren't clipping properly. That was probably just how I exported the model. There's really not much I can do about that except trying to mess with the model a little bit more in order to make it work more properly. But again, there's only so much I can do. Basically, this is an invisible stairwell, which is really funny. And there's an invisible floor, which doesn't exist. But if you... Let's try no clipping outside of the frame. Basically, it exists from underneath, but not directly on top of it. It's a very interesting system. And the flight mechanic is rather fun, just to fly around this large-scale library, so I guess we'll do that. There's a series of floors, all of which work in a pretty fascinating setup. That gives me a ton of space in terms of hyperlinking specific segments and areas. I can add doors like over in that region over there, but I can also link to the specific doors that are there, change the artwork, really adjust the model type to be whatever I want. I added these really low-level stairwells just as terms of planks, just because it offered the same functionality in order to get the separate levels. But I'll probably wind up fixing that over the long period. I want to add some more interesting space objects based off of how, such as that art easel, that specific art installation. I think that I could make this more like the Caitlin Swift Museum project, especially over the long term in terms of hyperlinking interesting things on the internet. And it doesn't have to be hyperlinking specifically to 3D-based VR areas. I can also hyperlink to websites or anything that allows for hyperlinking, which makes me able to share just about whatever content I want, and I like that freedom. In terms of a large sandbox to work around in, I think this serves as a pretty interesting idea, and I'm quite happy with it. It's huge. It offers a lot in terms of flexibility. Yes, again, this isn't my model. It was created for a specific video game, and I do feel a little bit weird using a model that isn't mine. Ultimately, it is for fair use, and it is just a testing ground in order to make something happen. But it fits my aesthetic, and I rather like it. This is a shorter video, simply just to showcase what I've been working on. Just making this model work alone in terms of porting it through Blender, adjusting it from being an OBJ file into just a series of file extensions, recreating it, opening it in several different programs, uploading it to spokes. It took a lot in terms of time just to get this to run properly. The biggest issue I was facing was the textures, once I compiled them into the file that Spoke would run, were overlit and bloom was everywhere. It was chaotic. But eventually, after a few hours of tweaking, I did manage to make it look somewhat decent in a VR space. And I think that that's where I'm going to leave it for now, at least until I can make some more iterations in the future. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy this series and seeing the progression of this specific VR space, I think that you'll find subscribing really interesting. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave it in the video below, under the video below. Thanks for watching.